is has an exhibitor booth. So if you want to learn more about the network, pop into the exhibitor booth during one of the breaks throughout the conference. And another thing I want to mention before we get started, want to thank the sponsors for this panel. So thank you to Farm Credit, the conference's longtime supporter, who's generously supporting this year's Nifty Field School track. In addition, this particular session is sponsored by Santa Fe, so thank you to them for their generous support of this year's conference, and take a minute to visit them at their exhibitor booth as well during the conference to say hi when you get a chance. Another thing we want to acknowledge before really diving into things, realize that there is a lot going on this week, particularly in terms of politics and the election, and totally realize that some folks may be distracted. That's understandable, and we also really appreciate that you are all here and showed up to join us this morning for this panel. And just a quick tech overview before we dive into things. I know many of you are probably very familiar with Zoom at this point in the year, but just some reminders. The mute and unmute button is the little microphone if you're joining from a computer. If you are calling in from a telephone, it's *6 to mute or unmute yourself. The camera on off button is the little video camera icon to the right, oops, to the right of the microphone. And then we will be using the chat throughout the session today. So see, many of you have already started sharing where you're joining from and what you're excited about. And then throughout the panel at any point today, if you have questions, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat. And if you have clarifying questions, we'll do our best to stop and answer them, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. If you're calling in from a phone, and there's a question that you want to add, you can do *9, and that'll let us know that you're raising your hand so that we can unmute you. And most of the presentation will be doing a slideshow, but during portions where we're just doing Q&A or in breakout sessions, you can toggle between gallery view or speaker view. So that's in the top right portion of your Zoom screen. The 9 little boxes that are next to each other makes it so you see all the faces together at once. And we are recording. That's correct, right, Bo?
Yep.
Great. So we are recording. We won't be recording the breakout rooms, and this will be available for any conference attendees to come back to if you want to check it out later. And appreciate everyone's patience. You know, I know that many folks are calling in from rural areas, so if you need to turn your video off or there's little bumps or glitches, appreciate your patience. We also want to go over just some brief ground rules. Want to remind everyone that everyone on the call today has something to share. So we ask everyone, makes room for others to share and to ask questions. We're all here to learn. So even, those of us who are speaking on the panel, we consider ourselves students as well, and ask everyone to be open-minded and non-judgmental, and to listen with respect, and don't be shy about asking questions. Honoring the process, being on a virtual platform and doing virtual meetings means, we ask everyone to stay on topic, to try to separate questions from comments, and we'll do our best to stay on time. And then throughout the presentation, to try to minimize distractions, so keep muted unless you're speaking, and if you're comfortable with it, once we go into breakout rooms, to turn your video on so that you can
Tom.
with other folks.
How are you? Good.
And I think on that note, there's someone who's not muted, so just a reminder again to click the little microphone button to mute yourself. Now, just a little overview of what to expect today, how this workshop is organized. So obviously with the pandemic, many of us this year have had to shift to online learning either in part or completely. And for many of us, that was something that was totally new. And there's definitely some challenges with it, but also some silver linings and some learnings, and being able to make content and opportunities that we have to share more accessible to some groups. And sort of regardless of what happens with the pandemic in the coming year, it's likely that online learning is going to be here to stay in some way or another. So this is an opportunity for for all of us to think about how we're doing online learning and to really hone our skills. In this presentation, we're going to be doing our best to try to model some of the tools and strategies that we're going to be talking about. So in addition to talking about a tool or strategy, we'll be trying to talk about why we're doing what we're doing. We'll also be sharing, some other resources and links throughout the presentation in the chat. Just a reminder that the chat will also be available along with the recording at the end. For a portion of the call, we are going to split out into breakout rooms. So we do want to try to make this interactive and hear from you all. In addition to being able to talk with one another in the breakout room, we also really encourage questions and comments to go into the chat throughout. We're going to be sharing some case studies and examples from our own organizations, but again, really want to hear about your experience and what has been working and what has been challenging. And so we're hoping to leave a decent amount of time for question and answers at the end. And now, brief introductions to who's on the call today. So I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Leah Ritchie. I'm the New Agrarian Program Director at the Quivira Coalition. We're based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we operate an apprenticeship program partnering with farmers and ranchers throughout the Intermountain West who do regenerative agriculture. Now I'll turn it over to Bo.
Hey all, just a reminder to mute yourself, please, to cut back on feedback noise. But my name is Bo. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the beginning farmer specialist up here in Maine at the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. I oversee our apprenticeship program and our journey person program and help support farmers in their first few years of business. And I'm also a flower farmer up here. So Kevin, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Bo. My name is Kevin Cody. Use he, him pronouns. My title really that relates to this work is Farmer Training Program Manager with New Entry, and so helping develop curriculum and courses, manage grant projects and that kind of thing for our beginning farmers in our incubator farmer training program. I also have a position at Tufts University as a professor of practice in food systems, where online education is also very much a part of what we do. So it's been nice to think about how to integrate some of those things, which we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. So we really want to get a sense of who's in the room with us. So we're going to launch a poll. Polls are a really great way to just really quickly at the beginning of workshops that you're doing, maybe with farmers or people learning to farm, to get a sense of maybe feedback on the topic. So it's something that you set up in Zoom prior to a workshop. So we have a few polls, and what's going to happen is you're going to get alert on your screen and you'll respond to that and select everything that applies. So what describes your role in agriculture? Choose as many as apply. And polls usually go pretty quickly. So it's a really great way when you're hosting a workshop to get feedback really, really fast. And then you'll see in a second that I can actually share back the results with you so we can all get a sense of who's in the room. It's also a great way to do it anonymously. So people can feel synergy and solidarity with people in the room without having to, break confidentiality or share their identity. So I'm going to end this poll and share the results with you all. Also, when you do polls, it's important to consider that people might be joining your workshop via phone. So I'm gonna just whatever is shown on the screen here, I want to talk actually through that. So in the room today, we have a good amount of farmers, 20 farmers are joining us, a bunch of facilitators, some university and cooperative extension staff, and some students and apprentices. Welcome. And some people said other. So if you want to type into the chat, if you identified as other, who are you? How are you relating to beginning farmer training? We encourage you to share that in the chat. Okay, and then let's see, organic inspector, creating and writing educational materials, awesome. So we have a second poll here just to get a sense of like how long have you been doing online learning? For some of this might be the first time that we're engaged with, online learning due to COVID. So just getting a sense of where you are at in your facilitation with online learning tools. Awesome. So as you can see, these tools of polls go pretty quickly. We have a good amount, around 50% that online learning is since the start of COVID. Yeah, beginning farming training, we're probably all more used to like hands-on or experiential learning. So online learning is a new area for many of us here. Some people have doing it from 1 to 5 years, and a handful, around 18%, have done it for 5 to 10 years. So with that, we're going to jump into some breakout rooms. I think that's what we have next. Yeah, awesome. So we would love to hear more from you about what your experience has been like in online learning. And specifically, what has went really well and what really hasn't. So think about like, what's been the worst experience that you've had since the beginning of COVID in an online space, and what made it a poor experience, or like what have you been engaged with through online learning yourself as a learner in COVID times and on an electronic platform, and say, hey, that actually went really well. Like what made you feel engaged in that space, and what made you excited to use the online learning platform, maybe in your own programs. So breakout rooms, if folks haven't done this, these are a really great way to, have more of an in-person connecting with new people. We encourage you to turn on your video in that space if you're comfortable with that. We're going to divide you into groups of 3 or 4 people. So please introduce yourself and respond to these questions. So we'll have around 12 minutes in this space. And then we're going to come back as a group to share back what you all, maybe talked about. So introduce yourself and talk about these online experiences that went well and maybe didn't go so well. So for breakout rooms, what's going to happen is I'm going to put these questions into the chat. And if you click on the chat button, which is the little comic-y looking speech bubble, now you should be able to still see that when you're in your breakout rooms. And I will also broadcast these questions across all breakout rooms. So when you're in that space, you'll actually see them go across your screen. And I do that like a few times throughout just to like keep us on track. And if you're not looking at the chat, you still have a reminder of those. Leah or Kevin, do you have anything else you want to share about breakout rooms while I magically judge these and create them?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's important to think about ahead of time if you're facilitating an online meeting is, do you want to pre-populate your breakout rooms, or do you just want to have it random? And there's pros and cons of both. So if you have no idea how many people are going to show up, it's a lot easier and faster to do it just automatically generated random, because it's pretty time consuming to try to figure out who wants to go where. But if you're, if it's a group where you know ahead of time, who's going to be attending and you know your participants already, then it's a lot easier to, if you want to try and split it out so that you have, certain people in certain rooms. But doing that on the fly is pretty challenging.
And I'll add a quick example for that. In our farm business planning class, we have pre-assigned breakout groups because we want people to be doing work with each other throughout the course in a peer-to-peer learning environment. And so that's one way we use some of the pre-assigned group function.
Another thing that you could do is say you have multiple topics, like you are in a session about soil science and you have people exploring different types of soil composition and they want to explore different types of soil. You can actually have people change their name. So how you would do that is everyone can go to the top three, the three dots to the right of their video feed, and you can encourage people to change their name and say, bow-clay soil. And so then when you as a facilitator go to create those rooms, it's much easier to manually sort them in a quicker way. We're not going to do that now. We're just going to randomly assign them. So they're going to be randomly created. But those are some things about breakout rooms. So I'm going to create these rooms. Thank you. Someone did just put those questions into the chat. I appreciate that. I will also do that in a minute after I launch these rooms.
In Western North Carolina, I'm just working with one variety that we have. Some of my board members have multiple varieties. So hopefully with this SARE funding, if we are successful in getting it, we're going to start expanding the number of varieties.
Okay, there we go. Just a reminder, when we're in the big group space, we do have a lot of people on this call, so please do mute yourself. Okay, I'm opening all the rooms. If you get kicked out of your room and you rejoin the main room, don't worry, I will then help you get back to your room. Okay.
It seems like we may have some folks on the call who are multitasking, so we may have a few people who don't end up going into their breakout room.
For sure. If you're currently in the main room, Kathleen, Julianne, Joanne, feel free to, oh, I need to actually assign you. Okay, that's what's happening. I'm going to assign you to a breakout room. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of Joanne Slingerland. They must be calling in from multiple accounts. Okay. I don't know why it's not automatically muted, guys.
I can't do it since I'm not a co-host, but I think on the participants box, if you click on the more, oh, I can do it.
Yeah.
Mute participants upon entry.
Mute a print. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I was like, that's never happened to me before. I must have clicked something wrong when I was setting up this meeting. How are you feeling?
I think
Kevin,
you're muted.
What time are we going till in breakout?
Checking. We have a lot more people than I was anticipating.
Right. It's great.
15, 17, 15, going to 12:30 or 11:30, sorry. So we're running a few minutes behind.
Yeah, it's a good sized group. I don't know how many concurrent sessions there are with Stewardship Association.
Oh, I can look that up.
Okay. I don't. Hey, Joanne, are you there? Can you hear us? Mhm. Joanne, can you hear us? iPhone. Okay. So we have some people that are, hey, Katie, were you previously in this workshop and you got kicked out of a breakout room? Katie, if you want to unmute yourself, we can help you get back to your room. Same with Joanne. Hey, Jessica, were you previously in a breakout room? Feel free to unmute yourself and I can help you get back to the breakout room you were in.
No, I got booted before we switched into breakout rooms and just got back in. So you can put me wherever.
Welcome back. Thanks for joining back in. I'll move you to breakout room number 7.
Okay.
There you go. And Joanne, it seems like you might be having some tech issues, but feel free to message in the chat or unmute yourself and I can help you navigate where you want to go. We have some rooms that have like 2 people in them. Some people have 5 people. I don't know how that happened. Maybe people left.
Yeah. We've been experiencing that with Kavira's conference, that like I think the plenary panels, like people weren't expecting to do breakout rooms and discussion.
Mm.
And the numbers like totally plummeted from when it was the panelists speaking to then going to break. Like I think a lot of people were just like, this isn't what I signed up for.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an interesting topic I hadn't really thought about before, but like people being like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
Breakout room business. But maybe they'll come back.
Yeah.
Have the overall numbers gone down? I guess it's only saying our rooms.
I think there's kind of a difference too between like a workshop and at least like the way Kavira's conference has sort of branded the plenary panels, that they're like big. I think just with those and the way they've done before, people like really weren't expecting breakout rooms to happen.
Yeah, we're still at like 47.
Cool. Are you going to have anyone try to do like the raise the hand function or anything, Bo, to share back?
Sure, that's a good idea. The raise the hand in the Zoom chat participant panel.
Yeah.
Probably not. It's just I don't feel comfortable with. I've never actually used that and haven't seen. Okay, we have people joining us. Welcome folks that just joined. We are currently in breakout rooms. So if you were previously in a breakout room, please unmute yourself and I can help you get back to where you were. Or if you're just joining us, just let us know that. See Sloan and Delia. Oh man, this is like wild keeping up with all these people joining and rejoining. Okay. Hey, Rachel. If you were previously with us, please unmute yourself and I'll help you get back to your breakout room.
Hi, I had to step out for a minute, so I wasn't in a breakout room before, actually.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're actually going to come back in 2 minutes. So if you're down to just hang out, then maybe that's what we'll do.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So we have 13 rooms, and if everyone shared out for 1 minute, that would be 13 minutes. So do we want everyone to share? It seems like that might be a lot.
We could have people comment in the chat and then we could just call on a few people to like elaborate what they put in the chat.
For sure. And I can just talk about, we weren't expecting that much, so we adjust as needed.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like there's a little lesson there too, in that my experience has been 90% of the time things take longer online than you think they will or that they would otherwise.
So I'm doing this share back and then it goes to you, Kevin. And we do have a poll about
Engagement tools or online platforms.
Learning platforms, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So just to remember to cue the poll. I'll do that. Okay, I am going to, hello folks that are in our main room right now. We are closing the breakout rooms, so everyone's gonna rejoin us. Thank you for holding on. Folks have a minute now to join the breakout or come back to the main session. So, hey Amber. It's nice to see people's faces.
Sorry I'm late. My students ran over.
You're totally fine. It's the nature of the game. Okay. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. So part of this workshop is us being as transparent as possible as facilitators to create a learning opportunity here and kind of pull back the veil of facilitation so we can all learn about online learning platform facilitation. So some of the things that happen is there's a lot more people on this call than we anticipated. So our timeline of how long the sharebacks would take, we're adjusting that, and we'll figure out how to do that in a way that everyone feels like they can be heard. And the other thing is when using breakout rooms, people's internet stops or they might join midway through a workshop, and so they're in the main room, and then we help people get back to breakout rooms that they were in, or people can just hang out in the main room. So those are two things to think about. And I think, yeah, those are also about attendance, like, and judging attendance. Say we were just talking about, you know, scheduling an online workshop at a conference and 70 people register for that, maybe 40 people will, or 40% will actually show up for that workshop. So adjusting on the fly as facilitators creating breakout rooms is the nature of the game. So welcome back, everyone. We hope everyone's conversations were engaging. So how we want to do the share back. So for people that have access to the chat, we would love to hear or read, and I'll share out. What was the worst experience you had on Zoom? What made that the worst experience? What went really wrong in workshops that you've been a part of? So please put that into the chat. Someone asked, what do you think is a good number of participants for a breakout room? It really depends on the space. So I do a lot of anti-racism conversations for white people and have white caucus facilitation. Those spaces, I wouldn't go more than maybe 10 people, and also pair shares before going into that, like a one-on-one is a great place to start because it can generate conversation. So when people get into that bigger room, they're still engaged. I would never go more than 10 people. And we'll talk a little bit about equity and online facilitation because those voices and navigating 10 people in a room is a lot. And you often have people that dominate conversation. Some of the worst experiences, oh gosh, 8-hour Zoom call, that should never happen. No, no more than 2 hours on Zoom at a time in my mind. Silence, yes, personal, awful. That's like my facilitator's worst nightmare is like if no one responds is. Not being able to read fractions and feelings during hard conversations. Yes, it is very hard to read people over Zoom. Lots of people not on mute, having other conversations. Yeah, thank you so much for these. Facilitator not using the mute all button. Thank you, that's my fault. I just learned about that button. Appreciate that call out. Accidentally left someone in the waiting room while presenting. Yes, it's important to have multiple facilitators. One person can do the slide deck, another person can do the participant management. Oh, that's all right. Even if it was about me, Chase, that was my own fault of not muting everyone. Okay, so we just want to take a time and say what went really well on Zoom. What was actually a positive learning experience. And if you want to type that into the chat, I will also vocalize that out. When I am in a workshop that is probably more than 25 people, it's very difficult to have people just in general unmute themselves to talk because multiple people might try and talk at once. I also never want to like put someone on the spot if they are not comfortable sharing out. So as much as possible, you know, providing consent. So if someone wanted to unmute themselves and talk, you could type that into the chat and you can unmute yourself. Yeah, what went really well on Zoom for you? What made a positive learning experience? Oh, and the speaker had background music when we came into the room. That's so nice. I love that. Workshops with lots of interactions from participants. Yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, having virtual events allow more people to attend who couldn't before, limiting the travel time. We'll definitely talk a little bit about that and actually these opportunities that we have with online learning. Being able to meet people across the world, being able to reconnect and having background options, integrating somatic learning with cameras off or on and coming back to share guided experience for sure. I have personally loved moments where we end a workshop with a poem read or music playing or something like that to kind of interact a little bit more. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to have those conversations. I'm going to pass things over to Kevin, who's going to talk a little bit about different online learning platforms.
Thanks, Bo. So it's obvious we're here in Zoom that this has become a kind of de facto way that we do some of this online learning, but it's certainly not the only way. And I'll talk just briefly about a couple of examples, things that we're using here today and things that we use in New Entry. But maybe want to start with a poll from Bo and see what platforms are people using. And you can collect or select all that apply.
So folks on the phone, we have this question, what platforms are you using? Some of the options are Zoom, Moodle, which is a fabulous name, personally, I think. Google Classroom, Canvas, Blackboard, social media, so things like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram Live, TikTok. I don't know if people are using that to reach students, but it's a possibility. Or no platform, you haven't tried anything out. And other, if you selected other, please type into the chat and tell us what you're using. So just sharing the results here. Can y'all see that? Can I get a thumbs up that you're seeing that for folks that are on video? Thank you. We have 98% are using Zoom. Good handful are using social media to reach people. And then we have a smattering of like different online learning platforms like Moodle, Google Classroom, Canvas, Blackboard. Someone typed in Teams, Microsoft Teams. WhatsApp, yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for sharing. It's nice to see the social media presence too, in a way that helps to meet people where they are, right? As social media has kind of become ubiquitous in our lives, and some of those platforms have as well. Things like WhatsApp, I know have been really useful for some of our immigrant refugee farmer communities as a way of interacting and sharing information. The other thing to consider about selecting an online platform is what's the objective that you want to accomplish. If it is something like information sharing, where you can kind of use it as a repository for resources, some of these, like Canvas, for example, which I'll talk about, might be over-designed, right? They might do more than what you need them to do. And so maybe a Google Docs or some sort of shared drive accomplishes that, and that's great. So I think, just to reiterate, it depends on sort of what your learning objectives are, and making sure that you can access some of those resources that are most suitable for those objectives. The other thing to consider is that some of these require license fees and are behind a paywall, essentially, which is true for things like Canvas and Blackboard, which are usually kind of the domain for university online education. We can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to put up a quick screenshot of Canvas for folks who haven't seen it. This is what we use at New Entry as a program of Tufts. We're fortunate that we have access to something like Canvas. And a couple years ago, we started transitioning all of our programs to Canvas, even ones that had an experiential component or even in-person class component. So again, even though we were doing most of our courses in person and on the farm, having Canvas really made a difference, because we could collect assignments, we can put materials up there, we could structure and organize those materials in ways that I think are conducive to learning. So this is one example. We'll start out each module, and you could think of a module as sort of a topic. Sometimes they're based on weeks, sometimes not. And really helping students prepare to understand what they're getting into, by introducing a topic like harvest and post-harvest handling in this case, what we'll be covering, what materials are included, and then what some of these other topics. This happened to be a module that included food safety as well. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Is there a free version of Canvas?
I don't know, actually. And if there is, it might be only temporary. So that's a good question. And maybe somebody who's more familiar, if they've done some work with this from the university side, could speak to that. or put it in the chat. But generally speaking, I think Canvas and Blackboard require licensing fees that are most affordable to large institutions like universities. Yeah, someone says maybe yes, but limited capability. I think a lot of folks have had good experiences from what I've heard with Google Classroom too, and I know that's becoming a lot more common. Thanks. So I want to just share a couple things that we've done recently in some of our courses, and maybe we'll get some other examples from Bo at MAFCA as well. As I mentioned, New Entry was doing online courses to an extent, in the sense that we used Canvas to house a lot of our course materials. But even in those cases before this year, we were meeting mostly in person, and we would do some hybrid versions of courses. For example, we teach a business class where we would meet every other week in person and every other week online. What we're doing now is every week online, and that has some benefits. Where this becomes much more difficult, which you could imagine, is when you're talking about courses that have an inherently experiential component. We teach a series of crop production courses over the summer on the farm, and what makes those, I think, really valuable is having the ability to sort of front load some course content around, let's say, cultivations, tillage strategies, and then bringing students or participants to the farm. We did this on a weekly, sometimes every other week basis, to really implement and to do the things that they had been reading about. But we also have stuff that we can do here, and tools ranging from the polls and the surveys that you've seen already. I've also been in a room where we had a survey link to a Qualtrics survey put in the chat. So if you wanted to get everyone in that room to take a survey, what better way to do it than to stop for 5 minutes, put the survey in the chat, and say, pop out and please, take this survey. You also have reactions that you could do on the bottom of your screen. It'll show up like that. The chat, visual cues are certainly helpful when you have video, especially in a smaller group. And maybe in the chat too, are there other sort of engagement tools, either through the Zoom platform or other ways, that have helped you engage with participants? And we'll let those kind of trickle in. So I do want to provide a couple of examples as we were thinking in the spring about what it means to do experiential online learning. We've created a couple of activities that I'll talk about that really highlight the capability of still doing what I would say is sort of place-based learning. So meeting individuals where they are and making the space that they occupy in this Zoom world relevant to those learning objectives. Polls everywhere. Yeah, that's a good one. Annotation for sharing and brainstorming in smaller groups. So thanks, Greg. I'm gonna try to see if we can't use that annotation function here in a sec. Another way to kind of make the learning experience perhaps more engaging is to emphasize the ability of participants to collect information, to record that somehow through a video or an image, and to share it back to the group. So I'll talk about a couple of brief examples here, if we can move on. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to skip through this really quickly, but I do want to mention just the peer-to-peer learning has been a really important part of our business course, where in breakout groups, students can kind of work with their business plans in a small group. And I think that getting their feedback from their peers has been really useful. This is just a couple of images too of what the polls and the breakout groups look like that we've been working with today. We can go to the next slide. Someone's mentioning Google Jamboard. as well. And that's something that I've used in my other classes that I think folks have found pretty useful, especially it's kind of like a shared Google Doc, but has a little bit more sort of flexibility in terms of presenting information. So this is what the activity looks like that we've posted in our Canvas course. And this was about identifying weeds, and weed identification being an important step to management. So we encourage people to basically sort of go out and to identify weeds in their garden setting. And then be able to take pictures of those and come back and for unknown stuff, we could crowdsource it and say, okay, does anyone know what this is? And that was a useful sort of strategy in our course this summer to getting folks to kind of go outside in their immediate environment and to tie that into a learning objective around weed identification. On the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to ask everyone to do something now in Zoom. Maybe you've done this before, maybe you haven't. In your screen that you're looking at where the presentation is, if you move up to the top and it says you're viewing Leah Ricci Cuvetta Coalition's screen, next to that there's a button that says View Options. Click on that button and then click on Annotate. And you're going to see a little menu come up, and in that menu is something called Stamps. And then you can put a stamp anywhere on the shared screen. So what I'm going to ask you all to do now is to put a star next to the lamb's quarters. Nice. It looks like folks are using this. You can also have the annotate function be anonymous, where you could have it attached to people's names in a learning environment, especially a smaller one where you're wanting to kind of, build some relationships. It can be nice to see who's doing what, especially if you're doing more text-based things. So I will say that, let's see here. Here, on this side, my sweet circle is the lamb's quarters. Does anyone want to type in the text what they think this other weed is?
Kevin, can you do this on a phone?
I've not tried.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Oh, awesome. Someone typed in Amaranth. Chase, I want to respond to your question. Is there an on-demand of a recoded Zoom meeting that includes a poll? Can the poll be integrated into the participants viewing the meeting after the fact? Oh, like in the recording of the meeting, is the poll visible? I don't believe it is unless you export the chat, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that's part of the recorded screen.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I think, and this is pigweed amaranth, by the way. So I guess we could take both of those answers. I'd be curious too if other folks have other names for this. Red root, is stuff that I've heard in Colorado as well. So I feel like it's one of those ubiquitous weeds that sometimes gets its own names depending on where it is. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and let maybe Leah clear or Bo the annotations. Nice. And there we go. And we're back. So this is just one example of a way you can make the presentation itself interactive in addition to kind of sending people out into their immediate environment. Will you go to the next slide, please, Leah? Another thing we did in our class this summer was a soil jar test. This is a simple way for people at home to be able to accomplish a learning objective about understanding soil, soil types, and these are some photos of participants submitted soils from their soil jar tests, and we had a little activity basically kind of going into this, and then use these results to also bring in NRCS soil survey results from different farms in our area, and another way of kind of just highlighting the place-based dimensions of where we are when so much of that can seemingly get lost in a Zoom environment. Okay, I think we could go to the next slide.
Awesome. Leah, did you want to say anything about engagement tools that you all are using at Kivera or like online learning platforms?
So I think, yeah, I'll share a little bit more about Kivera Coalition and how we use online learning when we talk a little bit more about social networking. I think one of the takeaways for us is that because we don't actually teach a lot of curriculum-based topics in our program, our apprentices do most of their hands-on learning, with their mentor wherever they're located, and then we bring people together once or twice a month for speakers and discussion. That for us, sort of keeping it simple, we use Zoom, to bring our 20 apprentices together. Sometimes we have outside speakers, but like some of the learning platforms that are really great for curriculum are kind of overkill for our situation. So I think that's what my takeaway is for this section is think about, like what are you trying to accomplish in online learning, and do you need a more robust tool, or is something simple like Google Hangouts or Zoom sufficient for what you're trying to do?
For sure. And like building in time for teaching people any tool. Like Kevin just taught us how to use that annotate tool. I use Moodle for 8-week whole farm planning course that I teach called Farm Beginnings. And I'll be using Moodle this year, but a whole week of that course is actually dedicated to helping people navigate the platform, learn how to explore the curriculum on Moodle, and submit Google Google Sheets to it, and also getting comfortable with Zoom. So one of my personal least favorite things is when I'm in a Zoom meeting, a one-time workshop, and they're using a tool that is like interactive slide decks, and we take at least 15 minutes all trying to navigate how to do that, and thinking about what do you have the capacity for, what do you want to get out of that workshop? Is this a standalone, or is this a relationship you're building with the people you're supporting for many weeks or a year to come? So thank you all for folks that are popping in questions and conversations into the chat. It's great to see people, supporting each other through this. We did want to take a moment to talk about equity in online learning. This is something that as facilitators, we bring to any space that we would be in person. And it's equally, if not more important, that as we navigate Zoom land and, the present times, and acknowledging people's capacity and ability to learn in these new ways, that we are centering equity and justice in all of those thinkings. So online learning is great because we have this potential to reach across space. I know I'm in Maine, and there's parts of Maine that it would take 8 hours for me to drive to. It's very rural, so this form of learning allows for many farmers to interact with it. But these bring up a whole new slew of questions. So thinking about internet access and assumptions of access to internet. There's places in my town that we can't actually get internet service. So I work with farmers and I send out hotspots to those farmers. So acquiring funding to be able to support people in accessing internet is something that your organization might think about doing. So thinking about hotspots or internet access. Another thing to think about is safe spaces and vulnerability. When we interact online, there is a potential that we could be completely anonymous. By me sharing my video right now, you see that I am a white person. You might see that I am a queer person. You can see that there is a house behind me, so I have housing security, at least during this call. There's things that when we share ourselves and the space behind us, those are things to think about, is people might not want to share that, and allowing that to be okay in the spaces that you're facilitating. Tech comfort. People have very different and very widely experiences navigating tech. People might only have access to a phone, and people might not have ever gone on Zoom before COVID. So really taking the time, even though it feels redundant, to honor that and recognize people where they're at and support them in overcoming those tech barriers as much as possible. Phone involvement is also a really important thing. I know that in this workshop, we have been using the chat function, but you can notice that when people are using the chat function, we as much as possible are trying to read out loud what people are saying. So if someone is Zooming into this workshop via their phone or they called in, they still feel like they can have an experience that they're learning information from. So when you're facilitating, recognize people that are on the phone. You can maybe talk to them ahead of time if you know that they're going to be coming in by phone and say, hey, there will be a slide deck. I will share it out with you afterwards. We'll share out the recording, and then talking through as much as possible what you can, and don't assume that people are actually able to look at the screen in front of them. Zoom compatible devices. If someone has a flip phone, they're not going to be able to see any screen projections. So thinking about that and the access to tech people have. I mentioned this a little bit, but power dynamics and group conversations. This is something that when you're facilitating in person, you might be able to read the room a little bit better, gain a temperature read on where people are at with the material or any group issues that are coming up. On Zoom, it's harder, like I'm kind of talking to myself in my kitchen. Some of you I can see and some of you I can't see. So it's harder for me to gain reactions as someone that is holding the space. And also it's much easier for people to take up a lot more speaking space in breakout rooms without maybe being conscious of it. So, as much as possible, using engagement tools to read people, to connect with people, also recognizing that some people are really introverted and might feel more comfortable having their video off or not using reactions. So don't make assumptions about people based on what they look like in their video screen. All of that is part of it. And I also am getting more and more comfortable like setting a timer on sharebacks after breakout rooms and saying like, oh, we only have 2 minutes, like actually cutting that off to try as much as possible create equitable learning environments. Some great resources that I really wanted to share out. The Training for Change website is incredible and has access to free workshops about building your skills as an online facilitator. I'm dropping that into the chat. For folks on the phone, it's trainingforchange.org. They have an incredible resource called Leading Groups Online, which if you're interested in diving more about these like equity goals of online facilitation, has a really awesome primer for that. They have workshops for online facilitation and engagement to gain more comfort and like kind of flex these muscles of like practicing online facilitation. And with that, I don't know if I have anything else to add on equity issues, but if folks want to add into the chat or respond to any of that, we'd be welcome to, or we can answer any questions about that, or Kevin or Leah, if you have things to add. Great. Thank you.
So another aspect of online learning that we wanted to talk about that has, I think, become sort of more important and more relevant with the pandemic is trying to accomplish social networking and connection using virtual tools. I think, many of us, in addition to having to shift to teaching in online spaces, we've also been, trying to figure out how to fill this void, where people aren't able to gather in large groups. And, in addition to trying to figure out how to teach, also trying to, make sure that people have an opportunity to feel connected and network with one another. So my organization, Quivira Coalition, our apprenticeship program, we've always had to figure out how to deal with the challenge of people being isolated. In our program, we have about 20 apprentices who are spread out across 4 different states. So even in a non-pandemic year, isolation has come out as one of the biggest challenges that our apprentices deal with. And so knowing that, that everyone is facing that this year, even more so, we put some extra thought this year into like how to help people feel connected to one another. And so one of the things that we've done is in our monthly supplemental ed calls that we do for apprentices, we've adjusted our expectations a little bit about how much content and curriculum to cover and material. And since we have a group of 20 people that we see at every meeting, we've made sure to build in time at the beginning of every meeting to do some check-in questions to give people a chance to share how things are going on their operation, how are they feeling, what did they do today, things like that. And then we also added in an optional monthly happy hour that was not at all focused on teaching or curriculum, but was just another chance for apprentices to talk with one another and sort of share about the common experience that they were having, and to feel a little bit less alone in what they've been going through this season. One of the things that has also felt really important this year is just to acknowledge the change and how things are more challenging from how they were before. And going into some of our meetings and events, as facilitators, we were really worried about is this going to even feel useful to people? And I think just being able to acknowledge that this isn't the same as meeting in person, it helped people be able to get something out of it still, and to acknowledge it and then move past it. Again, in some of our meetings, since we have a fairly small group and the same people, also using breakout rooms, it's another opportunity for people to chat with one another. My experience has been that doing breakout rooms, when people are chatting with total strangers, it may not feel, quite as good as if it's, people that you have in a cohort and get to see on a regular basis. So for social networking purposes, I think the breakout rooms really work well when you have the same group of people that you're seeing over and over. We also use Slack. So it's a messaging platform that a lot of organizations use to sort of cut down on email. But we use it with our apprentices as well as a platform for just being able to share resources and articles and chat with one another. They can post photos to it. So that's been another way that we've helped connect people. And then also just, listening for feedback, and, if your goal is social networking, trying to really get feedback from your participants on, what has felt like a valuable use of their time and what works. And, if the goal is to serve the participants, you really want to hear from them. If something feels more draining and not a good use of their time, trying to force people into showing up for something, maybe not super effective. And so really trying to listen, to the participants in your group and hear, what do they need? Do they want, facilitated, organized things where, you have a discussion on an article that you sent out and everyone reads ahead of time? Or do they just want to show up, with a cup of coffee and hear how your weekend was? What do they need? So I'd love to hear from other folks as well of how have you tried to, address the needs of connection and social networking that have been a lot harder to address this year with the pandemic. And while folks are, sharing into the chat, Bo or Kevin, not sure if either of you have other examples of ways that you've tried to help your participants feel more connected to one another. Or what, I see you laughing, Bo, what has been particularly challenging that, we're all still trying to figure out?
I am laughing because I often get asked to host Zoom happy hours because I'm very extroverted, and my gosh, it's so awkward to think about how do we how do we create as much as possible this like natural space of connection? That's my personal biggest like grief and loss around Zoom adaptation, is losing the farmer to farmer connection. But I did host a happy hour where everyone had to write dating profiles for their pets. And it was quite entertaining. So just like really, yeah, thinking about those icebreakers, thinking about different ways we can interact. We like then had a "Are you the one?" matchup for our pets. I knew the group change, you know, adapting how you know the group. Yeah, I did want to respond to some questions that are coming to the chat, but Kevin, if you have a thought about social networking, I'll let you go on that.
Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you for folks that are specifically asking about interpretation and language translation and closed captioning for accessibility. I would love to hear, this is like personally a hard, I haven't found a good solution for this. So if you have things that are really working, please put them into the chat. Zoom does have the ability to sync up a third-party closed captioning services, or we can try this right now. I can assign Leah to closed caption, and she can actually type everything that I'm saying right now to make closed captioning. But you notice that I talk very fast, and it's going to take Leah a very long time to type out what I'm saying. So, so some issues with closed captioning is so someone's transcribing it, but oftentimes it is a very slow process. You can use a third-party closed captioning services, but they are not very inclusive to different accents or things like that. And the one thing that I have seen is that if you actually upload a recording to YouTube, YouTube does have free closed captioning. So as much as possible, exploring those ways that's free and accessible to everyone. But if people do have services that are working really well for you, please pop them into the chat. Jennifer said that they use Otter to transcribe recording files, and there's a free version. But yeah, would love to know solutions around that. Okay, over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Bo. So just a few sort of concluding thoughts, and then we're going to have a moment for some reflections and some Q&A, because I think that this is a unique opportunity that we have here. There are so many people thinking about strategies for online learning and experiential education in particular, and wanting to make those two things sync up. So the first is just sort of acknowledging, the individual's capacity and access to do this work. It's not the same for everyone, and I think that the transition for a lot of folks are more abrupt than it is for others. And so this is a process that I think a lot of us are undergoing for the first time. And so it's important to also practice patience. And I know this has come up in some of our planning calls for this session, just in that, again, people are navigating this space. People are navigating a lot of very stressful situations in a home environments, maybe, and in the social environments and physical environments. And so there's just a need to kind of acknowledge that this is a challenge. And I think the more we can be patient and meet people kind of where they are, the better. And that relates to sort of bringing that awareness into our learning environments and creating space to acknowledge some of that, some of those challenging things that people are going through. Sharing resources is another, I think, really important and valuable opportunity that could come out of this sort of really massive shift in some of our towards online learning and our experiential pedagogies. And I know that for us as an organization, focusing on videos and really producing videos and capturing videos of farmer training related topics has been a really valuable tool for us. And I think at least where we are in Eastern Massachusetts and in New England, we're starting to hear from a lot of other service providers that they were doing something very similar. And so we're not quite there yet, but the possibility emerged, well, what would it mean to create an online sort of learning platform that we could share across beginning farmer organizations to highlight some of the work that individually we're doing, but also to sort of curate that work, to put it into an open resource kind of platform where others could contribute to it, and there could be some sort of filter where you want to learn about greenhouse management. Well, here's the kind of the thread, so to speak, for a series of videos from organizations and from farmers who are doing this that want to also sort of contribute to the online learning space. So with that in mind, I want to make sure everyone can, if they want, to do a shout out to any open source online learning resources, videos or otherwise, that you want to put in the chat. And if I can't be so bold, I might even start with some new entry playlists around ag resources where you can learn about greenhouse management and no-till seed drills, or BCS, if that's a thing. And I'll just write new entry resources here as well. You know, this is a really important, I think, lesson for a lot of folks too, is trying to avoid redundancy in this space. And the more we can share information and resources with each other, I think the better. So feel free to share whatever resources you might have in the chat. Reading the Zoom room, Bo's touched on this a little bit as well. It's obviously a little bit more challenging to do without video, but it's also challenging to do in a situation where everyone's muted. You know, you don't get to hear the kind of little sort of responses or nods or those utterances that actually go a long way towards understanding social dynamic. And just be aware of that too as you're going into these spaces. If it's possible, sometimes it's nice if the mutes can be left off in a small room to capture some of that sort of audio nuance. And the last thing I'll just sort of emphasize, and would be curious to hear more about from folks in this group, is rethinking experiential learning in an online platform. You know, at New Entry, like I mentioned, we're really trying to emphasize the kind of place-based nature of education, and acknowledging that even in our immediate surroundings, I'm in, you know, a city near Boston where I don't have much soil outside, but I have some. And so if that extends to actually sort of starting seeds, germinating seeds inside, talking about sort of, you know, propagation, we kicked around the idea of even sharing or mailing people packets of seeds and soil to kind of start some propagation indoors in the spring. So I'd be curious if other folks have some innovative strategies that they're using or thinking about that could make this online learning platform feel like it at least has some of that hands-on component that we really value and privilege in a farmer training program. So that could go in the chat, and I don't know, I'll open that up too to Leah and Bo if you have anything else you want to add in the conclusion or just notes in general.
Oh, go for it, Leah.
Thanks. One thing that's felt sort of really relevant and important in some of the calls that I've facilitated recently is that asking folks to practice patience, and not just patience with the facilitators, you know, who are trying to navigate these, you know, new platforms and new way of teaching, but patience with other participants as well. You know, so we're all in this together, and the reality is that online learning is a little different. Things take longer. Some people in the room, you know, may not be as good at using the tools, or, you know, might not be as aware of, you know, how much time they're taking up when they make a comment or ask a question. And it requires more patience of all of us. And so reminding folks, you know, of the importance of being patient and being respectful of others, and having, you know, empathy for the fact that we're all learning and in this together.
Awesome. I wanted to share out some resources that people are putting in the chat of different Zoom features. Greg says you can pin the video of people to focus on their screen. This is also a good thing to know if you're recording something or if you're facilitating another speaker that's maybe come on to a Zoom workshop, is to actually spotlight their video so everyone is seeing them as the main person. You do that by clicking on the 3 dots above their video and say spotlight video. And then another thing that I popped into the chat is the interactive slide deck from Training for Change. This is, again, one of those tools that I would probably only use if I was facilitating a group that I will continue to interact with. But those are slide decks that everyone can go into and, you know, everyone interact with. So similar to annotation, it's a way to actively get people to collaborate on a platform. Yeah, Chase, this is a great point. I often found with meetings where the facilitator asks for feedback or asks if there are any questions, to use that patience to give people the time to click unmute and get their question answered. Often people don't wait long enough and think that there are none when they just didn't wait long enough to give people a chance to answer. Yeah, being comfortable with silence is personally something that I need to practice more. So this is a great reminder for that. Yeah. And with that, we are actually going to go into a space of silence to practice this with our wrap up. This is a chance to kind of reflect. So we really want people to take, you know, a good minute, 2 minutes to think about, we touched on a lot of different things throughout this workshop today, different engagement tools, different things to think about when you're creating up a online learning support for beginning farmers. Take a few minutes to figure out, like, what are tools or strategies that you'll put into practice this winter for online programming. What's maybe new things that you learned. So we're going to take a few minutes and just journal, think about that. You can feel free to pop it into the chat when you have some thoughts on it. And then we're going to go into some questions. So folks have mentioned breakout sessions. If I can figure out how to do that, yes, that's real. You have to be the host of that meeting to be able to access that. Annotations, polls, communication through the chat. Planning and preparing is important. You really have to think about how you're going to facilitate and what needs to happen to make that effective and engaging. I have to think differently when planning virtually versus in person, for sure. Like, I often think about when I'm facilitating something in person, sometimes it's twice as long. Like, if the meeting is an hour, I usually budget 2 hours of planning to plan the facilitation for that meeting. Online, similarly, if not more, because there's so many different ways people are going to be interacting in this space. At this point, we're going to try, we do have a big group here, but we're going to try, if folks want to unmute and respond to this question about, like, different ways you're thinking about engaging online learning, or any questions or comments at this time, you can unmute yourself. And thank you. We will practice patience while waiting for people to unmute themselves. And then also type any questions into the chat. Yeah, Laura, you popped something in the chat. Can I encourage you to unmute yourself to explain what you're talking about the raise hand feature? This is a great tool.
Sure, yeah, just if I have a lot of students, if I have like 40 students and I want to do a Q&A or I have it's time to say, okay, who knows the answer to this question, then I use that raise hand feature. So then I can choose someone and then I can unmute them if I'm managing it, if they aren't very good at managing the mute button.
For sure. And that raise hand feature is under the participants. So if you actually click on the participants at the bottom of your screen, and then over by your name or below it, you'll have there's a yes and no, go slower, go faster, and then you actually click on more. There's different features like thumbs up, thumbs down, I'm going to get coffee, things like that. So there are features like that. Kevin's raising his hand right now. And then I can click ask to unmute and he will unmute himself.
And that is how the raise hand works.
That's a great tool. Thank you for bringing that forward, Laura. Any other questions or comments?
Well, for me, when we go on do, or so we could able to find on how to do it, so that way we could able to learn just in case we don't have things we don't understand.
Is that a question about what do we do when there's things that we don't understand, like in the information or the content being shared?
Yes.
Like, are you how to handle questions throughout a workshop or a class? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So I think that's totally up for you as a facilitator to decide if you want to handle questions throughout, or if you want them saved to the end. And that's something that if I have co-facilitators or co-presenters, that I would ask them, like, do you want to just do your presentation and wait till the end for questions? People can put that into the chat as we go along. If you're using the webinar version of Zoom, there's a question and answer section, or you can have people use the raise hand feature, things like that. I don't know if Kevin or Leah, you have thoughts on that.
I think one other thing that we've mentioned a few times is that with some of these tools, it is really important to teach how to use them. And there's various ways to do that of, sharing your own screen and demonstrating and walking everyone through it, or taking a screenshot and getting an image to put on a slide. But that is sort of a first step of like these opportunities, for people to ask questions and comments, making sure that before you even get there, that the people who are on the call know how to use those tools for raising their hand or typing into the chat.
I have a question about that folks might respond to in the chat. Well, not about that, just a general question regarding a comment that just came in, that it seems one of the upsides of this kind of transition into a learning environment is that, or online learning environment, is that the farmer training program could access more people, or more people can access these programs. I'm wondering if folks want to just quickly type in the chat, have you experienced greater enrollment in a program that was moved online compared to when it was maybe offered in person?
Yeah, and also a cool thing about that is that we are seeing people from all over the country engage in like virtual farm tours that we do, which is really interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, but we've messed around a little bit with some virtual farm tours, and we know some other incubator farms that have done a really great job too with drones. We're like right next to an airport, so we can't do drones very well at our place. But there is some Google Earth options for really getting some nice images aerial images of a farm that you could integrate into a virtual tour. There you go.
Yeah, Jennifer is saying there are 3 virtual farm tours on the field school wall in the conference app.
Nice.
Yeah. Our students have been very happy to have classes recorded to refer to again later. Yes, this is being recorded, so we'll share it out. Now I'm trying to figure out how we can record our live classes when we get back to that point. Question coming in, if and when in-person programming can resume, do you anticipate incorporating a virtual hybrid component in order to reach a larger group of stakeholders? Either you want to respond to that?
I mean, I can say that in short, we're likely to maintain elements of the virtual or online learning that we do now. And I think a lingering question is, do we create a standalone option to maintain that for folks who are going to be 100% virtual, whether that's synchronous or asynchronous, or do we want to maintain, and we'll likely have some hybrid going on into the future. The question is, do we maintain a solely online version? And I think there's a good chance that we do. I think we've seen participants really seem to think that it's a very valuable experience, even though it's online, even though the experiential components are limited, that we've had great feedback from it in the summer courses that we did. So we'll likely continue those.
Yeah, and I think for Career Coalition in our new agrarian program, we figured out that there are like a couple, particular types of events and things that we used to do in person that have worked really well virtually, and some things where, like if we are able to move back to doing, an in-person orientation for our apprentices, we would love to go back to doing that in person because it's so nice for people to be able to actually meet each other in person. But then we used to do these, we called them Ranch 101 workshops that were weekend workshops that were free and were open to anyone who is considering, going into ranching or wanting to do an apprenticeship and to sort of learn more about the experience. And that was something that we've gotten way more people to participate in, an online version to learn, online workshop to learn more about the apprenticeships and the program. And, people don't have to travel, whereas before, like you had to have been geographically located to one of the workshops in order to attend. So yeah, I think for us, there's like some things that we found a ton of success with and other things that, when we're able to move back to in-person events, we'll do so.
Yeah, that's similar to us. I do think that there's benefit, and in ways the online programming can be more inclusive to folks that have kids at home maybe, or different job structures, or can't drive or don't have access to vehicles, but do have access to technology. There are ways that we can actually build that into our programming. For the business planning class I teach, I send out a paper copy of all the worksheets that people do, because I still think that there are some things that are really good to do like by hand or interaction and conversation with your farm partner, or if you don't have a farm partner, we match people up over Zoom for those conversations. So I do think that there is still great like synergy between in-person and also paper versions of things and tech versions. I think we actually have to wrap up. Are we done at 12:30?
I believe so.
Okay, so yeah.
I see one more question here from Amy about how are you offering closed captioning? So Kavira is also doing a virtual conference right now this week and next. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you want to send me an email, I can let you know what we've been using to do closed captioning for the Kavira conference.
Here are our contact informations if you want to reach out to any of us. For folks on the phone, I'm Bo, I'm from MOFGA. My contact information is bdennis@mofga, MOFGA.org.
And I'm Leah from Kavira Coalition, Leah@kaviracoalition.org. Kavira has 2 I's in it.
And Kevin Cody, kevin.cody@tufts.edu.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're
Thanks,
going
everyone.
to
Yeah.
wrap up, and we hope that you have a great rest of the Fields Conference.
Thanks, everyone.